Okay, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to grab Selector full stacks repo. Selector.js. Okay. So let me go into my folder over here. This is going to be and this is our library. And let's say git.clone. Let's see why that is. Oh, wrong link. This guy. Git.clone. Okay, so let me go into Selector because I'm making this part of another repo. Is you don't really want to have repos within other repos. So you don't have to do this, but get rid of this. Git repo. Okay, so let's actually get this running. And I'm going to use, let's see, I'm going to use browser sync. So I think I could say browser sync. Open this up. It's a little bit weird because you have all these folders here. But really what I want to do is I want to open up this file, right? I want to be able to open up this file. And when anything inside of my source changes, I want to reload the browser. Just something to see. Let's see if this will work. We should be able to say browser sync, server, files, source. So this is just a, actually we can just do this. Inside of source, any of our JavaScript files, we only have one. So it's going to look for those files and it'll restart our server and start. So browser sync.start. So now this will open up. And let's see, it doesn't see this here. I think we have our files are in, and it should just be able to open it up as a file. So is it like spec runner?
Yeah.
So spec runner HTML, I think that'll work. Okay. So here's all our tests that are failing, and as we go through this, we'll end up getting our test to pass. So if you look at, and this is, you know, the way that this is set up, it's going to lead you down this path here. We've got our spec file, and this is a little bit different. So this is actually, the way that this is actually running is that it's not going to be using any node or anything like that, like testing does. What this is doing is actually loading up the Jasmine standalone framework library. So it's loading up Jasmine, it ends up loading up our tests, and it ends up loading the specs. And in this case, there's a reporter within the browser that tells you whether or not your test ended up passing. So this is running Jasmine directly in a regular browser. So what we're going to do here is if we look at this, we see that we are going to use we've got this method called selector type matcher. And if we pass this with a pound, we're going to get back ID. We pass it with something that begins with a dot, we're going to end up getting back class. If we pass it something that has a dot in it, that's not the first character, it's going to be tag class. If we pass it anything else, it's just going to be a tag. So if we go to our spec itself. Here's our selector. Here's our selector type matcher. So we could do something like this. First, character equals selector dot slice, and we could slice off from 0 to 1. Yeah. Let me just do something real fast here. This is going to give me an array. I really just want one character here. Oh, it's a string. Slice operating on will basically just give you a string back. Okay, that's a little confused there for a second. Operates differently on arrays than it does on strings. Okay. So now that we have our first character, we could ask whether or not our first character is equal to a pound. If it is, we're going to return ID. If we go back here, we should see one of our tests is going to be passing. We could come over here and say, you don't need an else here because you're returning otherwise. You're not going to make it down here if you have an ID. The first character is a dot. We're going to return class. All right, now we've got 2 tests passing. If index of selector, selector.index of dot not equal to -1, return tag class.
When would it be -1? What is that?
So the index method of a string, you know, again, it would be nice if you had some sort of contains method to find out if a character was inside of a string, but you don't have that. So index of for either a string or an array will find out if this character is in the string. If it's in the string, it'll give you the index to where that is. So it could be, now in our case, it couldn't be at 0, because if it was at 0, we would have returned already, okay? But this is a way of telling you, hey, look, is there a substring within a string? Because it'll tell us the index, and the index has to be 0 or greater. So it returns -1 if it's not. It's a little bit of a weird method. So what we want to do is, in this case, return the tag. And, thank you. We've got these 4 tests passing. Now, if we look at our specs, this one is a little bit more confusing, right? Let's just take a look and see what this is doing. So we've got this selector pound price. We end up using this match function maker by passing in that selector. We end up creating an element. We set the ID of the element. And when we call this matcher with the element, we expect the results to be true. So there's a couple of things that we know. We know that this function that gets up created, the function that ends up getting created with match function maker is going to return another function. And that other function is going to end up getting an element, okay? So what ends up happening here is that we're going to end up using some closure in order to get this to work. just say this is the sort of thing is not the most common thing, but could turn out to be pretty helpful. So here we're going in here, and again, we're generating a new function when we do this. Here's the function that we're going to generate, and we're going to define our function here, and we're going to return our function. So in this case, we're going to use our selector type to find out what type of selector match function we're creating. And our match function here, again, in all these cases, it's going to get passed an element. And what we have to do here is to say, hey, look, is the element's return element.id is equal to, now don't forget our selector has a pound in front of it. So we could probably say selector slice from the first position, right? That should take us from the first position to the end of the string. And if that gets our first test to pass, that would be good. And I think it did, right? Because now we're going to be on the class matching. Now, the class matching is a little trickier here. But again, we're going to do our match function equals a function that's going to get passed in an element.
Make it a little bit.
Sure. Good? So here, what we're going to have to do is that if we just did this, we could start out by saying, hey, look, if return element dot class name, again, class is a reserved word, so you won't end up seeing class here. But if we could say element dot class name is equal to, and again, we could use our selector and slice off that dot. Now, if we do this, we're going to find out we expected false to be true here. Doesn't really tell us all that much information. Over here and did console.log element.class name. It would tell us why we're failing. So sometimes we have a class name that's just that class, but if you have multiple classes, you're going to get, it's a string. I mean, if you looked at the type of, you would see that this is a string. There's also a way to get a class list, which is actually a list of the class names that's sort of like an array. That same stuff we've run into. So what we could do is we could actually ask the question and say, class name, you could split it on a space, index of selector.slice1, right? Did we find the class name in this list of class names? And not quite.
What happens if you return -1? Is that return false or?
It's a good question. No, you're right. You're right. That could definitely do it. Let me see. Yeah, good point. Index of perfect. Not equal to -1. Right? Index of is just going to tell us an index, not going to tell us whether it passed or not. Okay? So that works out pretty well. Now, this is going to become a problem later on. It's going to become a problem later on is that when we end up looping through nodes, we're going to find out that we could have text nodes, and text nodes don't necessarily have class names. We can assume here that we do have class names because we know how we're testing this out. But we're going to find that the text node, and when we attempt to split, So we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. So we could do our tag class, or we could actually do our tag, which is going to say, hey, look, take the element. The element only has one tag name. We're going to take the tag name to lowercase. The reason why you do this is that when you ask for the tag name, you get it in uppercase. So we'll say, hey, look, we're going to take the tag name to lowercase. We'll say, does it equal the selector to lowercase? And if we look, we'll see that our tag, not elem, but element, ask him if it's back. Thank you. I don't know what happened. It just asked me. Okay, good. All right. Okay. So let's go and so this gets to be a little bit confusing, and we're going to want to draw it out a little bit. But if you think about this, we've got a class and we've got a tag. So we could go over here and break this up into two parts, element.className.split, index of, and this is going to be our class.
Can't see your screen.
They can't see my screen now. Really? Odd. All right, let's try to just fix this real fast. Let me, let's do this. Let me just save this. Sorry about that, guys. All right, so remind me of my link here.